Before I tell you what appeared on our radar screens during the winter of 2023, you need to understand something about radar operation in remote installations. When you're working night shifts at a facility that was built during the Cold War, using equipment that should have been replaced 20 years ago, monitoring airspace that sees maybe 3 commercial flights per week, you develop a very specific relationship with the machinery. You learn its quirks, its false returns, its ghost echoes. You learn to distinguish between a flock of migrating birds and a small aircraft, between atmospheric interference and actual contacts. You learn that radar, despite its reputation for objectivity, is an interpretive tool. It shows you data, and you translate that data into reality. If this story makes you reconsider careers in air traffic monitoring, or if you've ever worked in isolated technical facilities where the systems are older than you are, leave a comment. I need to know if anyone else has seen what I've seen. Subscribe if you want to understand why I submitted my resignation 3 weeks ago and why I haven't been able to sleep properly since November. My name is Mikhail. I'm 34 years old. For the past 6 years, I worked as a radar operator at Installation 23, a monitoring station located approximately 180 kilometers northeast of the regional capital, in an area that used to matter during the previous century. The installation sits on a plateau at roughly 900 meters elevation, surrounded by pine forest that extends for dozens of kilometers in every direction. The nearest town is 40 kilometers away. During winter, which lasts from October through April here, the access road is often impassable for days at a time. The facility was built in 1967, renovated poorly in 1989, and has been gradually forgotten ever since. We monitor civilian airspace, record meteorological data, and maintain communication relays for emergency services. It's not glamorous work. Most nights, nothing happens. The installation consists of 3 buildings. The main operations center, where the radar equipment and control stations are located. A maintenance shed that houses backup generators and repair equipment. And a residential building with sleeping quarters for the rotating staff. During peak operation, the facility employed 42 people. Now, we have 6. 2 radar operators working 12-hour shifts, 1 maintenance technician, 1 communications officer, and 2 administrative staff who rotate weekly. I work the night shift, 8 p.m. to 8 a.m., 4 days on and 3 days off. My shift partner was Dmitry, who handled the day rotation. We'd overlap for 30 minutes during handover, exchanging notes about system status, weather conditions, and anything unusual in the logs. The equipment we use is a mix of Soviet-era hardware and newer digital systems that were installed during the brief modernization effort in 2003. The primary radar is a PSR-2M, a pulse surveillance radar with a range of approximately 400 kilometers, depending on atmospheric conditions and target altitude. It operates on S-band frequency, sweeping the assigned airspace sector every 6 seconds. The display is a plan position indicator, showing returns as bright points on a circular screen, with range rings marking distance from the installation. Each sweep paints a complete picture of everything in our monitored airspace. Aircraft appear as distinct contacts with associated data tags showing speed, altitude, heading, and identification transponder codes when available. Secondary surveillance radar, SSR, interrogates aircraft transponders to receive detailed flight information. Mode C transponders report altitude. Mode S provides identification and other telemetry. Most modern aircraft carry these systems. Older aircraft, private planes, sometimes only show up on primary radar as unidentified contacts. But even unidentified contacts have characteristics. They have speed, calculated by measuring position change between sweeps. They have trajectory, determined by tracking movement over multiple sweeps. They have altitude, estimated through radar elevation angle and signal strength analysis, or reported directly by transponder. What they don't have, what they can't have, is no speed at all. An object that appears on radar is either moving or it's ground clutter. If it's stationary relative to the Earth's surface, we filter it out. Buildings, towers, terrain features. These create permanent echoes that the system learns to ignore. If something appears on the display, it's because it's moving through the airspace. And if it's moving, it has speed. This is fundamental. This is not something that can be ambiguous. The contacts I'm going to describe had no speed, no altitude, no transponder identification, and no discernible point of origin. November 7th, 2023. My shift began normally. I arrived at the installation around 7:30 p.m., gave myself time to settle in before the 8 p.m. handover. The temperature was -12 Celsius, typical for early November. Snow had been falling steadily for 2 days, accumulating about 40 centimeters. The access road was borderline impassable, but the facility's old UAZ truck could still make it through. Dmitry was in the operations center when I arrived, sitting at the primary console with a cup of tea, watching the displays. He logged me in without looking away from the screens. "Quiet day," he said. One commercial flight at 14:30, Bucharest to Moscow corridor, passed through sector at flight level 360. Weather front moving in from the northwest, should reach us around midnight. Visibility dropping. System calibration is due tomorrow, but everything's nominal, nothing unusual. I took my position at the console, checked the system status indicators, reviewed the automatic logs from the previous 12 hours. Everything was exactly as he described. The radar display showed empty airspace, just the sweep line rotating steadily, painting nothing but filtered ground returns. The meteorological data feed showed the approaching front, temperature dropping further, wind picking up. Standard winter conditions. Dmitry finished his handover notes, pulled on his coat and left. I heard his truck start outside, struggling briefly in the cold before the engine caught, then the sound fading as he drove down the access road toward town. I was alone in the operations center. This was normal. The communications officer, Alexander, was in the residential building, monitoring radio channels, but not required to be present in operations unless something happened. Maintenance technician Boris was probably asleep. The facility manager and administrative officer were in the regional capital for their weekly rotation. It was just me and the equipment, exactly how I preferred it. The operations center is not large. The main room is approximately 8 meters by 10 meters, with 3 console stations arranged in a row facing the wall where the displays are mounted. The primary radar display is in the center, flanked by secondary screens showing digital data feeds, weather information, and system diagnostics. Behind the console stations, filing cabinets contain paper logs that were still required to maintain despite everything being recorded digitally. Regulations written 40 years ago haven't been updated. There's a small kitchen area in the corner with an electric kettle, a refrigerator that hums constantly, and a table where we eat during shifts. The walls are concrete, painted institutional green decades ago. The floor is linoleum, cracked in places, patched with duct tape. There are no windows. Fluorescent lights overhead create a steady, slightly flickering illumination. I made coffee and settled into the routine. Check system status every 30 minutes. Monitor the radar display continuously. Record any contacts in the paper log with timestamp, position, altitude, speed, and heading. Monitor weather data. Listen to the radio frequencies for any traffic, though on night shifts the channels are almost always silent. Read during the quiet periods. I'd brought a book, something about early aviation history, and I was making my way through it slowly, a few pages between system checks. The first contact appeared at 23:47. I noticed it immediately because the radar display had been empty for hours. During the evening, there had been one commercial flight, a cargo transport heading northeast, passing through the edge of our sector at high altitude. It appeared, tracked across the display according to filed flight plan, and departed the monitored area exactly as expected. After that, nothing. So when a new return appeared, bright and distinct on the display, my attention fixed on it instantly. The contact was positioned approximately 87 kilometers from the installation, bearing 214 degrees, southwest sector. It appeared suddenly, not tracking, in from the edge of coverage as aircraft normally do. One sweep, the display was empty. Next sweep, the contact was there. This can happen. Radar is line of sight, and terrain, atmospheric conditions can create temporary shadows where low-altitude aircraft aren't visible until they reach certain positions. I watched for the next sweep, expecting to see the contact move, expected to see data populate as the system calculated speed and trajectory. The next sweep painted the same return, same position, exactly the same position, no movement at all. I checked the speed vector indicator. Blank. The system couldn't calculate speed because there was no position change between sweeps. I checked the altitude readout. No data. The contact wasn't transmitting Mode C altitude information, and the primary radar couldn't establish altitude because the return characteristics didn't match any standard profile. I switched to manual interrogation mode, sending an SSR query toward the contact's position. No response. No transponder code, no identification, nothing. I logged the contact in the paper record. Time, 23:47. Position, 87 kilometers, bearing 214. Speed, unable to determine. Altitude, unknown. Identification, none. Remarks, stationary return, no transponder response. Then I watched it for 10 more sweeps, approximately 1 minute of real time. The contact remained fixed in position. Absolutely fixed. Not drifting, not moving at all. This should have meant it was ground clutter, a false return from terrain or a structure. But the position was over forested area according to the topographical overlay. No buildings, no towers, no geographical features that would create a radar return. And ground clutter doesn't appear suddenly. The system filters it out automatically, learns the permanent echoes during calibration, and excludes them from the display. I stood up and walked to the radar display, as if getting closer would help me understand what I was seeing. The return was clear, strong signal well above the noise threshold. Not atmospheric interference, not precipitation, not any of the usual false contacts that radar operators learn to recognize. It was behaving like an object, a solid object, except it wasn't moving. Then, at 23:58, it disappeared. Not fading gradually, not tracking out of coverage. One sweep it was there, next sweep it was gone. I checked the recorded data, reviewed the digital log. The contact had been present for exactly 11 minutes, stationary at the same position for the entire duration, then vanished without transition. I made notes in the log, marking the contact as unidentified, possibly equipment malfunction or anomalous atmospheric return. Then I ran a system diagnostic. The radar performed a self-test cycle, checking transmitter output, receiver sensitivity, signal processing, display accuracy. Everything tested nominal. No faults detected. I recalibrated the gain settings, adjusted the clutter filter threshold, and returned to monitoring. The rest of the shift was uneventful. The weather front arrived around 00:30, bringing heavier snow and stronger winds. Visibility dropped to less than 2 kilometers. But the radar doesn't care about visibility. It sees through weather, through darkness. The display remained empty until dawn, when I logged off and Dmitry arrived for the day shift. I mentioned the contact during handover, told him about the stationary return, the lack of speed and altitude data. He shrugged. "Probably weather," he said. "Front moving in. Temperature gradients can create anomalous returns sometimes. Did you run diagnostics?" I told him I had. "Then don't worry about it," he said. "If it happens again, we'll report it to maintenance. Check the magnetron tube. Maybe signal processing needs adjustment." I drove back to town, slept through the day, returned for my next shift 2 days later. Nothing unusual happened. The radar displayed normal traffic, a few commercial flights, one private aircraft that requested transit clearance through our sector. Everything behaved exactly as it should. Speed, altitude, trajectory, all parameters normal. I started to forget about the stationary contact, dismissed it as exactly what Dmitry suggested: equipment quirk, atmospheric anomaly, something that happens occasionally in aging systems. Then it appeared again. November 14th, 2352. Same position, exactly the same position, 87 kilometers at bearing 214. Same behavior, suddenly present on the display. No approach vector, no transponder, no altitude, no speed. Stationary for the entire duration. I checked my previous log entry. The first contact had appeared at 2347, this one at 2352, 5 minutes later, but close enough that it might not be coincidence. I watched it carefully, timing the duration. It remained visible for 9 minutes this time, then disappeared at 0001. I logged it, ran diagnostics again, system nominal, no faults. I checked the meteorological data, looking for anything that might explain a false return at that specific position. Temperature was -15, wind from northwest at 18 kilometers per hour, light snow. Nothing unusual, nothing that would create a radar return. During my next shift, November 18th, it appeared again. 2349. Same position. This time I was ready. I had prepared a more detailed observation protocol. I noted the exact signal strength, the return characteristics, the pulse response timing. I photographed the display with my phone, documenting the contact. I attempted different radar modes, varying the pulse repetition frequency, adjusting the beam elevation angle. The contact remained consistent across all settings. Strong return, stationary position, no identifying characteristics. Duration, 12 minutes. Disappeared at 0001 again. I showed Dmitry the photographs during handover. He studied them, frowning. "Same position every time?" he asked. I confirmed. "That doesn't make sense," he said. "If it was terrain, building, anything stationary, the system would filter it. We'd see it all the time, not just appearing randomly." He checked the radar performance logs, reviewed the maintenance records. Magnetron tube was replaced 8 months ago. Signal processing hardware tested last month. Everything's functioning correctly according to diagnostics. "So what is it?" I asked. He didn't answer immediately. Finally, he said, "Write a detailed report. Send it to the regional center. Let them figure it out. Probably need to send a technician out here, do a full system evaluation." I wrote the report that evening, documenting all 3 contacts, including timestamps, position data, photographs, and diagnostic results. I submitted it through the official channels. 3 days later, I received a response from the Regional Air Traffic Management Office. They acknowledged the report, noted that the position was over uninhabited forest area with no radar significant structures or terrain features, suggested that I continue monitoring and logging any additional contacts, and stated that a technical inspection would be scheduled when resources permitted, which meant, effectively, ignore it unless it becomes a safety issue. The contacts continued, not every shift, but regularly, always between 23:45 and midnight, always the same position, always stationary with no speed, no altitude, no identification. Duration varied between 8 and 14 minutes, but they always disappeared at or before EO 0.01. I logged each one meticulously, building a detailed record. After 2 weeks, I had documented 11 separate occurrences. Then I discovered the second position, November 29th, 23:51. The familiar contact appeared at 87 kilometers, bearing 214. I logged it, settling in to observe the usual behavior. Then, at 23:56, another contact appeared. Different position. This one was 112 kilometers away, bearing 156, almost due south. Same characteristics. No speed, no altitude, no transponder. Stationary. I stared at the display, watching both contacts simultaneously. They remained fixed in their respective positions, strong returns, behaving identically. At the 00, both contacts disappeared within the same 6-second sweep interval. I sat back in my chair, feeling something cold settle in my stomach. One anomalous contact could be equipment malfunction. 2 simultaneous contacts with identical impossible characteristics suggested something else. I didn't know what, but it was something else. The following shift, December 3rd, both contacts appeared again. Same positions, same timing, same behavior. I attempted to correlate them with any logical explanation, checking whether the positions aligned with any geographical features, airways, military exercise areas, anything. The topographical database showed nothing but forest at both locations. The airspace classification was G, uncontrolled, no special use areas, no restricted zones, no reason for anything to be there. I called Alexander on the internal phone, asked him to come to Operations Center. He arrived 5 minutes later, pulling on a heavy sweater, looking annoyed at being disturbed. "What's the problem?" he asked. I pointed at the display. "You see these 2 contacts?" He leaned closer, studying the screen. "Yes." "What are they?" "I don't know. They appear almost every shift. Same positions, no identifying information. Watch." We observed together as the sweep line rotated, painting the same returns over and over. No movement, no change. "They're not moving," I said. "No speed at all. System can't determine altitude. No transponder. But they're not ground clutter either." Alexander frowned. "How long have you been seeing these?" 3 weeks. More than 20 occurrences. Always late night. Always these positions. "Did you report it?" "Yes." "Regional center acknowledged, but hasn't sent anyone." He watched the display for another minute. "Could be military," he suggested. "Drones? Maybe. Low altitude, small radar cross-section, hovering in position. For 3 weeks? Same positions every time? No flight plans filed, no communication, no transponder codes? Could be classified operations. Wouldn't be the first time military does exercises without informing civilian radar stations. This was possible. It had happened before, particularly during the previous decade when tensions were higher and military activity in the region increased. But classified operations typically had patterns, schedules. They didn't appear randomly at nearly midnight, hover in position for 10 minutes, then vanish. "Maybe," I said, "but it doesn't feel right." Alexander shrugged. "Keep logging them. If they're a safety concern, if they're in controlled airspace or posing collision risk, escalate it. Otherwise, not much we can do." He returned to the residential building, leaving me alone with the display and the two contacts that shouldn't exist. They disappeared at 001, exactly as they always did. December progressed. The contacts became routine. I stopped running diagnostics every time they appeared, stopped trying to interrogate them with SSR queries that never received responses. I simply logged them, noted the time, duration, and any variations in position or behavior. There were no variations. They were absolutely consistent. Same positions, same timing, same characteristics. The weather worsened. Heavy snow, temperatures dropping to -20. The access road became impassable except for tracked vehicles. The installation felt more isolated than usual, cut off from the outside world by snow and darkness and forest that extended forever in every direction. During my shifts, the operations center was my entire universe. The concrete walls, the radar display, the contacts that appeared and disappeared according to their inexplicable schedule. On December 18th, I decided to review historical logs. This wasn't something I'd thought to do earlier. Current operations consumed my attention, and the historical records were stored in filing cabinets, paper documents that no one ever looked at because everything was being recorded digitally now. But the installation had been operating since 1967. 56 years of radar data, all of it logged by hand by previous operators, sitting in those filing cabinets, gathering dust. I pulled the cabinet open during a quiet period around 2 a.m. The files were organized by year, thick folders containing daily log sheets with handwritten entries. I started with recent years, working backward. 2022 logs showed normal operations, standard traffic, nothing unusual. Same with 2021, 2020, 2019. I went back further. In the 2015 logs, I found something. December 9th, night shift operator had noted, unidentified contact, 87 km bearing 214, no altitude or speed data, stationary return, duration 11 minutes, disappeared 0.0. System diagnostics nominal, origin unknown. I stopped breathing for a moment. Same position, same bearing, same behavior. 8 years ago. I kept searching, going back through earlier years. Found another entry in 2011, then 2008, then 2003, shortly after the digital systems were installed. Each entry described the same phenomenon. Stationary contacts appearing late at night, no identifying information, always the same positions. Some operators had noted just one contact, others had noted 2 or 3. The entries weren't frequent, scattered across years, but they were there. I went back to the Soviet-era logs, the older paper records from the 1980s and 1990s. The handwriting was different, the terminology slightly archaic, but the observations were consistent. 1987. Anomalous return, southwestern sector, stationary, no identification. 1994. Unexplained contact bearing 214, system unable to determine parameters. 1999. Multiple stationary returns, southern sectors, repeated over several shifts, no explanation determined. I pulled more folders, going back to the earliest records from the installation's operation. The logs from the 1970s were barely legible, written in pencil that had faded, paper yellowed and brittle. But I could make out enough. 1973. Unknown contacts, night shifts, no movement detected. 1978. Unidentified stationary returns, investigation inconclusive. The contacts had been appearing for 50 years. I sat at the operations console with folders of historical logs spread across the table, feeling something shift in my understanding. This wasn't equipment malfunction. This wasn't atmospheric interference. This wasn't any temporary or explainable phenomenon. These contacts had been appearing since the installation was built, observed by dozens of different operators using different equipment, recorded in log after log, year after year, and nothing had ever been done about it. I read through more entries, looking for any follow-up investigations, any conclusions. Found almost nothing. A few entries mentioned that reports had been filed with higher authorities. One entry from 1981 noted that a technical team had visited the installation, conducted a week-long evaluation, and concluded that the contacts were likely due to atmospheric propagation anomalies that created false returns under specific weather conditions. But the contacts had appeared in all weather conditions, all seasons, different atmospheric patterns. Another entry from 1995 mentioned that the contacts were being attributed to residual ground clutter, not fully eliminated by filtering algorithms. But ground clutter doesn't appear and disappear. Ground clutter is constant. The explanations didn't explain anything. They were dismissals, ways to acknowledge the phenomenon without actually addressing it. I photographed several of the historical log pages with my phone, documenting the pattern. Then I returned the folders to the filing cabinet and went back to monitoring the displays. At 23:48, right on schedule, the contacts appeared. Both of them. Same positions as always? I watched them, understanding now that I was observing something that had been observed for half a century by operators sitting in this same room, watching these same positions on different displays using different technology, and no one knew what they were. During the next handover, I showed Dmitry the historical logs. He paged through the photographs on my phone, his expression growing more serious. "You went through all these records?" he asked. "Most of them. Back to the early 1970s. Same contacts, same positions." "Yes." He set the phone down. "Mikhail, I need to tell you something. I've seen them too, during day shifts occasionally. Usually around noon, same behavior. I didn't mention it because I assumed it was an equipment issue, something maintenance would eventually fix. But if they've been appearing for 50 years, they're not an equipment issue." "No, they're not." We sat in silence for a moment. Then Dmitry said, "What do you think they are?" "I don't know. But I don't think they're aircraft. I don't think they're anything that flies." "Then what?" I didn't have an answer. How do you explain contacts that appear on radar but violate every rule of how radar contacts should behave? How do you explain something that's been present for 5 decades, observed by dozens of people, logged hundreds of times, and never identified? "I'm going to request a meeting with the regional director," Dmitry said. "Show them these historical logs, the pattern of appearances. This needs proper investigation, not just acknowledgement and dismissal." I agreed. He submitted the formal request that week. 2 weeks later, we received a response scheduling a meeting for early February, after the holiday period, contingent on weather allowing travel to the installation. In the meantime, the contacts continued. December gave way to January. The weather became brutal, temperatures dropping to -30, wind creating snowdrifts that completely buried the access road. We were effectively trapped at the installation, supplies delivered by helicopter every 10 days. The isolation was total. The sky was dark for 18 hours each day. During my night shifts, I would sometimes go outside during breaks, standing in the freezing air, looking up at stars that seemed impossibly distant, and then return to the operations center, where the radar display showed contacts that had no right to exist. On January 11th, a third contact position appeared. This one was northwest of the installation, 94 kilometers away, bearing 328. Same characteristics as the others. No speed, no altitude, stationary. It appeared at 23:46, remained visible for 13 minutes, disappeared at 23:59. The following shift, all 3 contacts appeared simultaneously. Then a 4th position revealed itself. east-northeast, 103 kilometers, bearing 067. By the end of January, I was tracking 6 distinct contact positions, all of them appearing nearly every shift during the late night hours, always between 23:45 and midnight, always disappearing by Euro 0.1. All of them stationary with no identifying parameters. They formed a rough circle around the installation, distributed across different bearings, ranging from 87 to 116 kilometers distance. I plotted them on a map, marking each position. When I connected them, they formed an irregular hexagon with the radar installation approximately at the center. The geometry was imprecise, but the pattern was undeniable. Whatever these contacts were, they were positioned around us, surrounding us. This realization created a feeling I still can't adequately describe. During my shifts, watching the radar display paint these returns sweep after sweep, I understood that I was sitting in the center of something. Something that had been there for 50 years, probably longer. Something that maintained these specific positions with absolute consistency, appearing and disappearing according to a schedule that never varied by more than a few minutes. I mentioned the geometric pattern to Alexander one night when he came to operations for a radio check. He studied the map I'd drawn, the 6 positions marked around the installation. "You think they're related?" he asked. "They have to be. Same behavior, same timing, positioned symmetrically. That's not random." "Related how?" "I don't know." He handed the map back. "Be careful, Mikhail. When you stare at anomalies long enough, you start seeing patterns that aren't there. Human brain likes patterns, creates them even when there's just random data. This isn't random. Maybe not. But what's the alternative? Something deliberately positioning itself around our installation. For what purpose? And why would it show up on radar but violate every law of physics regarding motion? These were good questions. I had no answers. The meeting with the regional director was scheduled for February 4th. Dmitry and I prepared a comprehensive presentation, compiling all the data, historical logs, photographs, position plots. We documented every contact appearance over the previous 3 months, showed the consistency, demonstrated that this wasn't random equipment error or atmospheric interference. The regional director arrived by helicopter with 2 technical specialists. We presented our findings in the operations center, walking them through the data, showing them the historical logs, explaining the pattern. They listened carefully, asked technical questions about the radar system, reviewed the diagnostic logs, examined the return characteristics. Then, one of the technical specialists, an older man who'd worked in air traffic systems for 30 years, said something that stayed with me. "I've seen reports like this before," he said. "Different installations, different regions, but similar phenomena. Contacts that don't behave according to expected parameters. Sometimes they get investigated thoroughly. Usually they get dismissed as equipment artifacts or unknown interference. The problem is, they're never reproducible under controlled conditions. They appear during normal operations, but when you set up dedicated observation equipment, when you bring in specialized monitoring teams, they stop appearing." "Like they know they're being watched?" I asked. He smiled slightly. "No, not like that. More likely, the act of installing additional equipment changes the electromagnetic environment enough that whatever creates these returns no longer occurs. Or the phenomena is timing dependent in ways we don't understand, and observation teams never stay long enough to witness it." "What do you think they are?" Dmitry asked. The specialist hesitated. Then he said, "I think radar shows us things that exist in ways we don't fully understand. Radar is measuring electromagnetic reflection, timing, Doppler shifts. When something appears on radar but doesn't behave according to aerodynamic rules, it might mean the thing isn't following aerodynamic rules. Might mean it's not an object in the sense we typically think of objects. Then what is it in the sense of? I don't know. Neither does anyone else, which is why these reports get filed away and forgotten. The regional director made notes throughout the meeting. At the end, he thanked us for the thorough documentation, acknowledged that the phenomena was unusual and warranted attention, and said that a formal investigation would be initiated. Resources would be allocated to install additional monitoring equipment, conduct electromagnetic environment analysis, and attempt to capture more detailed data during contact appearances. Then he left, along with the specialists, and I never heard anything further about the investigation. February continued. The contacts appeared every shift, all 6 positions now routine and expected. I stopped logging them in detail, just noted in the daily report. Standard anomalous contacts observed. 23, 45, 001, all positions. It became background, part of the job, like checking system status or recording weather data. But something else started happening. Small things, easily dismissed individually, but accumulating into a pattern that bothered me. The timing of the contacts became more precise. Initially, appearance times varied between 23:45 and 23:52. By mid-February, they were appearing within a 2-minute window, 23:47 to 23:49. Disappearance remained consistent at 00, 0, or 00.01, but duration was standardizing to almost exactly 13 minutes. The signal strength of the returns increased, not dramatically, but measurably. Early contacts had been clear, but not exceptionally strong. By late February, they were producing some of the strongest radar returns I'd ever seen, comparable to large commercial aircraft, despite having no altitude data and no movement. And they started appearing in sequence rather than simultaneously. On February 23rd, the first contact appeared at 23:47. Then, 6 seconds later, during the next radar sweep, the second contact appeared. 6 seconds after that, the third. All 6 contacts manifested in sequence over 36 seconds, as if they were activating one by one around the installation's perimeter. This change in behavior disturbed me more than the contacts themselves had initially. It suggested intent, coordination. It suggested that whatever was creating these radar returns was capable of adjusting its behavior, refining its manifestation. On February 28th, my last shift before a scheduled week off, something different happened. The 6 standard contacts appeared in their established sequence. I logged them, noting the times, watching them settle into their familiar positions. Then, at 23:54, a 7th contact appeared. This one was different. It was inside the circle formed by the other 6. Distance, 34 kilometers, bearing 192. Much closer than any previous contact. Same characteristics, stationary, no speed or altitude, but the proximity was new. I watched it carefully, feeling tension build. The operations center suddenly felt smaller, more confined. The radar display seemed brighter. Outside, wind was creating patterns in the snow, but I couldn't hear it through the concrete walls. Just the hum of equipment, the soft, repetitive sweep of the radar, my own breathing. The 7th contact remained for 8 minutes. Then, at 00:02, all 7 contacts disappeared simultaneously, exactly together, within the same sweep interval. The precision of that coordinated disappearance frightened me in a way I struggled to articulate. 7 separate radar returns, positioned across hundreds of square kilometers, all vanishing within 6 seconds of each other. Not fading, not tracking out of range, just ceasing to exist, as if they'd never been there. I completed my shift, logged off, drove home the next morning when Dmitri arrived. I didn't tell him about the seventh contact. I don't know why. Maybe because saying it out loud would make it more real. Maybe because I was starting to doubt my own observations, wondering if the isolation was affecting my perception. I spent my week off in town, trying to think about other things, trying to sleep without dreaming about radar displays. But I kept seeing those 6 positions arranged around the installation, kept thinking about 50 years of logs documenting the same phenomena. Kept wondering what the historical records would show if I went back further than the 1970s. Had the contacts appeared before the installation was built? Had there been reports from this area during earlier decades, when aviation was less common and radar less sophisticated? I didn't research it. Part of me didn't want to know. When I returned for my next shift rotation on March 7th, Dmitri looked exhausted. "How was your week?" I asked during handover. "Strange," he said. "The contacts have been appearing during day shifts now, not just late night anymore. They show up between 11:45 and noon, same position, same behavior. And there's more of them. 9 positions now. 3 new ones appeared inside the original circle, closer to the installation." He showed me his logs. The new contacts were at distances of 31, 28, and 26 kilometers, all of them exhibiting the standard characteristics. No speed, no altitude, stationary, appearing and disappearing according to tightening schedules. "Did you report this?" I asked. "Yes." Regional Center acknowledged. They said the investigation team would visit when weather permits. That was 4 days ago. Weather's been clear for 3 days. No one's come. We stood in the operations center, looking at the radar display showing empty airspace, both of us knowing that in approximately 12 hours, those 9 contacts would appear, arranged around us in concentric patterns, manifesting with increasing precision and coordination. "I'm thinking about requesting transfer," Dmitri said quietly. "Where would you go?" "Anywhere. Different installation, different assignment. I've been here 4 years. That's enough." "Will they approve it?" "Maybe, probably. Radar operators are hard to find for remote postings. They'll replace me eventually." I understood his impulse. Part of me wanted to do the same thing. But another part, larger and more insistent, needed to know what these contacts were. Needed to understand what had been appearing on radar screens in this location for 5 decades, observed by dozens of operators, documented in hundreds of log entries, and never explained. That night, at 23:47, the contacts began appearing. Not 9 this time. 11. 2 additional positions had manifested since Dmitri's shift, even closer to the installation. 1 at 23 kilometers, 1 at 19 kilometers. When I plotted them on my map, they formed 3 concentric rings, tightening gradually, closing in. The following shifts showed the same pattern. More contacts, closer positions. By March 15th, I was tracking 14 distinct positions, the nearest one only 16 kilometers away. All of them appearing with synchronized precision, all disappearing simultaneously at midnight. The radar display during that 15-minute window looked like a military exercise. Dozens of contacts surrounding our position, except none of them moved. None of them had altitude. None of them responded to any interrogation. On March 18th, Boris, the maintenance technician, came to the operations center during my shift. He rarely visited during night hours, usually stayed in the residential building or worked in the maintenance shed. But he walked in around 1 a.m., poured himself coffee, and stood watching the radar display for several minutes. "They're not showing right now," I said. "They appear around midnight." "I know," he said. "I've been watching from my room. I can see the display from there on the monitor feed. What do you think they are? He sipped his coffee, considering. I've worked at this installation for 12 years, he said finally. Maintained every piece of equipment here. Replaced components, calibrated systems, fixed problems that manuals said were unfixable. I know this radar better than I know my own car. And I'm telling you, those contacts aren't equipment error. The radar is showing you exactly what's there, which is something that doesn't move, something that appears and disappears without traveling through the intervening space, something that's been here longer than this installation has existed. You've seen the historical logs? Yes. I pulled everything from the archives 6 months ago, when I first noticed the contacts during maintenance checks. Read through 40 years of records. Same phenomena, consistently reported, never explained. He turned to look at me directly. You know what bothers me most? The geometry. The way they position themselves in perfect circles, gradually tightening. That's not natural. It's not random atmospheric effects or equipment artifacts. That's deliberate arrangement. Deliberate by what? I don't know. But I know I'm leaving at the end of this month. My contract expires and I'm not renewing. You should consider the same. He left the operations center, and I didn't see him again that shift. But his words stayed with me. Deliberate arrangement. The contacts weren't random. They were organized, positioned with geometric precision, tightening in calculated patterns. March 24th brought the closest contact yet. At 2347, along with the now familiar constellation of 16 other positions, a new return appeared just 11 kilometers from the installation, bearing 040, almost due northeast. When I plotted it, I realized it was approaching the limit of our near-range coverage. Radar is designed to track distant objects. Very close objects can create complications, blind spots where the system can't accurately process returns. This contact was barely outside that blind spot. The following night, March 25th, my last scheduled shift before another week off, I arrived at the installation with a sense of dread I couldn't rationally justify. Nothing had actually happened. The contacts appeared and disappeared according to their schedule. They didn't interfere with operations. They posed no apparent safety risk. But their progressive enclosure, the tightening rings, the increasing frequency, all of it suggested building toward something. The shift began normally. System checks, weather review, routine monitoring. Alexander came to operations around 10 p.m. for the scheduled radio check. We tested all frequencies, confirmed communication links with regional center, verified emergency protocols. Everything nominal. After he left, I sat alone in the operations center, watching the clock advance toward 2347. I don't know why I felt such apprehension. I'd observed these contacts dozens of times, but tonight felt different. The concrete walls felt thinner. The fluorescent lights seemed dimmer. The equipment hum sounded wrong, frequency slightly off. At 2347, the contacts began appearing. First, the outer ring, 17 positions now, surrounding the installation in a wide circle. Then the middle ring, 9 positions. Then the inner ring, 4 positions. Then the nearest position, 11 kilometers away. And then, at 23:48, a contact appeared inside the building. I'm aware how this sounds. I'm aware that radar cannot detect objects inside the building that houses the radar equipment. But I'm telling you exactly what the display showed. A contact position at distance, 0.0 kilometers, bearing, undefined, positioned exactly at the installation's location. The display showed it as a bright return directly at the center of the screen, where our own position marker sat. I stared at it, unable to process what I was seeing. Checked the system status. Nominal. No faults. The return was clear, unambiguous. Something was being detected at our exact location. I stood up, walked around the operations center, looking for anything that could create an internal radar reflection. Nothing. The equipment was designed to radiate outward, not inward. There was no mechanism for the radar to detect something inside the facility. The internal contact remained for 9 minutes. During that time, I experienced something I still cannot adequately explain. The air in the operations center felt different, heavier somehow, like atmospheric pressure increasing, but the barometric gauges showed no change. The lights flickered twice, brief dimming, then steady again, and I had the overwhelming sensation of being observed. Not by cameras or sensors, by something else. Something that was aware of my presence, my attention, my growing fear. At 23:57, the internal contact disappeared. The other contacts, all 31 of them in their concentric rings, remained visible for 3 more minutes. Then, at 00 they all vanished simultaneously. I sat motionless at the console for several minutes after, my hands shaking slightly, trying to understand what I'd witnessed. An internal contact, something that the radar claimed was inside the facility itself, occupying the same space as the equipment, as me. I logged the shift, noting all contact positions, including the internal return, though I struggled with how to describe it. The log entry seemed inadequate. Contact at 0.0 kilometer, undefined bearing, internal position detected, duration 9 minutes. How do you write officially about something that shouldn't be possible? When Dmitry arrived for handover at 00, I showed him the log. He read it twice, then looked at the radar display, then back at me. Internal position, he asked. Yes. The radar detected something at our exact location. That's not possible. I know. I saw it anyway. He ran diagnostics, checked every system component, reviewed the recorded data. The internal contact was there in the digital logs, time-stamped, documented, undeniable. This has to be equipment malfunction, he said finally. Some kind of internal reflection or processing error. Run a maintenance check. Call Boris. Have him examine everything. Boris arrived an hour later, still on site though his contract had formally ended days earlier. He spent 4 hours examining the radar system, testing every component, running calibration sequences, checking for any possible source of false returns. Found nothing wrong. The equipment was functioning exactly as designed. Then how did it detect something inside the building? I asked. Boris looked uncomfortable. It didn't detect something inside the building, it detected something at the building's location, not necessarily inside, just occupying the same position. What does that mean? I don't know, but I'm leaving today. Helicopter's coming this afternoon to pick up supplies, and I'm going with it. My replacement arrives next week. He looked at both of us. You should leave too. Request emergency transfer. Medical reasons, family emergency, anything. Get out of here. Why? Dmitry asked. What do you think is happening? Boris gathered his tools, preparing to leave. At the door, he turned back. I think something's been here for a very long time. Longer than this installation, longer than human radar technology. We built our equipment in its territory, started illuminating it with electromagnetic radiation, and now it's responding. Those contacts aren't aircraft. They aren't objects in any conventional sense. They're markers, positions being indicated to us, shown to us, so we understand the pattern. What pattern? Encirclement, progression. The contacts started distant and are moving closer. They're demonstrating boundaries, showing us the area they occupy or control or exist within. And now they've demonstrated that they're not outside. They're here, with us, in this building. He left. I never saw him again. Dmitry and I discussed what to do. We could report the internal, contact to regional center, request immediate investigation. We could request transfer, follow Boris's advice, and leave. Or we could continue normal operations, monitoring and documenting whatever happened next. We decided to stay. I don't know why exactly. Professional obligation, perhaps. Curiosity. The sense that we were witnessing something significant, something that needed to be observed and recorded. We agreed to maintain full documentation, log every contact, photograph the displays, preserve evidence. My week off came. I spent it in town, not sleeping well, thinking constantly about the internal contact, about what Boris had said, about concentric rings of radar returns tightening around an isolated installation in forest that extended for hundreds of kilometers. When I returned on April 1st, Dmitry looked worse. He'd lost weight, his face was drawn, and his hands trembled slightly when he showed me the logs from the previous week. The internal contact had appeared every night, not just during my shifts. Every single night, 23:47 to 23:56, without exception. And the outer contacts had multiplied. There were now 43 distinct positions, forming 4 concentric rings, the outermost at approximately 100 kilometers, the innermost at 9 kilometers. "I'm requesting transfer," Dmitry said during handover. "Emergency transfer, effective immediately. I've already filed the paperwork. I'm not doing another shift here." Did something happen? Besides the radar showing impossible contacts? Yes. Last night at 23:52, while the internal contact was present, I heard something. Not with the radio, not through the equipment. Just sound, like pressure changing, like air moving through spaces that shouldn't exist. And I felt it, Mikhail. Whatever creates that internal contact, it was in this room. It was here with me. I wanted to tell him he was imagining it, that stress and isolation were affecting his perception. But I remembered how the air had felt during my observation of the internal contact. The heaviness, the sense of presence. "Go," I said. "Request your transfer. Get out." "What about you?" "I'll finish my rotation, then I'll decide." He left later that day, taking personal vehicle to town rather than waiting for scheduled transport. The installation manager approved his emergency transfer request within hours. I was alone at the facility except for Alexander and the administrative staff. And they stayed in the residential building, avoiding operations center. That night, my first shift alone, I prepared carefully. I set up continuous recording on my phone, positioned to capture the radar display. I prepared detailed logs with timestamp columns, ready to document everything. I reviewed emergency procedures, checked the satellite phone, made sure I had clear evacuation routes if needed. At 23:47, the contacts began appearing. Outer ring first, 43 positions now. Then middle rings, systematically lighting up on the display in wave patterns that moved inward. Then the inner ring, close positions that were barely outside our near-range blind spot. At 23:48, the internal contact appeared. The air pressure sensation came immediately, that feeling of atmosphere becoming heavy. The lights dimmed slightly, then recovered. And I felt it, just as Dmitry had described. Presence. Something occupying the same space as me, something aware and attentive. I forced myself to remain calm, to continue my observations, to log what was happening. The internal contact maintained its position for 8 minutes. During that time, I experienced something that I can only describe as communication. Though there were no words, no sounds, no visible manifestations. Just understanding, growing in my mind like memory surfacing, except it wasn't memory. It was information being placed there. The contacts were not objects. They were not aircraft or drones or weather phenomena. They were positions, locations marked in space, where something existed that couldn't be measured conventionally. The radar detected them because electromagnetic radiation, when it encountered these positions, reflected back not from physical surfaces, but from boundaries, edges of something that occupied space differently than material objects occupied space. The installation was built in the center of these boundaries, not accidentally. The location had been chosen during the Cold War for its strategic position, its clear sight lines, its isolation. But those same characteristics made it optimal for observing what was already here. The radar, the electromagnetic surveillance equipment, all of it was perfectly positioned to detect and measure these boundary positions. And the entities, if they can be called that, had been aware of our presence from the moment the installation began operations. For 50 years, they had been showing themselves to us, marking their positions, demonstrating their geometry, testing whether we would understand. The progressive encirclement, the tightening rings. This wasn't threat. This was patience, gradual revelation. They were showing us more, bringing the boundaries closer, allowing clearer observation, because they understood that we were finally paying attention. The internal contact, the position at 0.0 kilometers, this was the final demonstration. They were not outside. They were not separate. They occupied the same space we occupied, intersecting with our reality at specific locations under specific conditions. This understanding arrived complete and certain. I didn't question it, didn't doubt it. I simply knew. At 23:56, the internal contact disappeared. The rings of outer contacts remained until 00, then vanished in their synchronized sequence. I sat in the operations center for hours after, trying to process what had happened, trying to decide what to do with the knowledge that had been placed in my mind. I completed the shift, logged everything. When morning came and Alexander asked if I was okay, I said yes, though it was a lie. I wasn't okay. Nothing was okay. The world I understood had been replaced with something larger and stranger and fundamentally different. I submitted my resignation on April 3rd, gave 2 weeks' notice as required by contract. The installation manager accepted without question, probably relieved to avoid another emergency transfer situation. During those final 2 weeks, the contacts continued appearing every night. The internal position maintained its schedule. I documented everything, photographed the displays, recorded detailed descriptions. On my last shift, April 17th, I prepared a comprehensive report. Not for official channels. Those would dismiss it, file it away, add it to 50 years of similar reports that led nowhere. Instead, I compiled everything I knew, all my observations, the historical logs, the progression of contacts, and the understanding I'd received during that night when the internal position had manifested with me in the operations center. I sealed this report in an envelope and left it in the filing cabinet with the historical logs, adding it to the archive that future operators might eventually review when they started seeing the same phenomena I'd seen. Then I logged off for the final time, packed my belongings, and left Installation 23. I'm now working at a different facility, coastal region, busy airspace with continuous traffic. Normal operations with normal radar contacts that behave exactly as they should. Speed, altitude, trajectories, all parameters as expected. Nothing anomalous, nothing impossible. But I think about the installation every night. Think about whoever replaced me, sitting in that operations center, watching the displays, waiting for 2347 when the contacts begin appearing. I wonder if they see the same things I saw. I wonder if they'll research the historical logs, discover the 50-year pattern, understand that they're observing something that's been there longer than radar, longer than human civilization in that region, possibly longer than humans entirely. I wonder if they'll stay, or if they'll run like Dmitri and I did. Mostly, I wonder what happens when the contacts finish their progression, when the innermost ring closes completely, when the boundaries they're marking become fully visible to us. Whether that represents communication or containment, revelation or warning. I don't have answers. I only have observations, data, documented evidence of radar contacts that shouldn't exist, but do exist, that have existed for decades, appearing in the same location with increasing frequency and proximity. If you work in remote radar installations, particularly older facilities in isolated regions, check your historical logs. Look for patterns in anomalous contacts. You might find what I've found. And if you do, document it carefully, preserve the evidence, but also consider whether you want to stay and watch what happens next. The contacts are not aircraft. They are not weather. They are not equipment malfunction. They are something else entirely, something that exists in ways our technology can detect, but our physics cannot explain. Something that has been patiently revealing itself to us for 50 years, waiting for us to understand. I don't know what they are. I'm not sure I want to know. But they're there, showing themselves on radar screens, marking positions around installations like the one I left, surrounding them in geometric patterns that tighten slowly, inexorably, measuring boundaries we didn't know existed. And they're waiting.